welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into an industry with an absolutely massive foundational scale, metals and mining. Think about it for a second. Literally almost everything around us, from the smartphone in your pocket right now to the steel beams holding up the building you're in, it all starts in the ground. But as you probably know, extracting all those resources has huge, undeniable impacts. So how do we actually measure those impacts in a way that's standardized and, well, meaningful? That is exactly what we're going to explore today, using the SASB framework for the metals and mining sector. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our 5-part roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the metals and mining standard itself, then tracking environmental impacts, followed by managing waste and tailings. Fourth, people, rights, and communities. And finally, ethics, safety, and transparency. Let's get to it. Section 1, the metals and mining standard. Now, before we measure anything, we have to establish our framework. And right off the bat, you'll notice that SASB specifically splits the metals and mining standard away from iron and steel producers. Why the split? Well, the raw, physically massive impacts of extracting ores directly from the earth are vastly different from the highly specialized, energy-intensive manufacturing processes of actually making steel. So SASB gives them two totally separate buckets to make sure the data stays highly relevant. To really grasp the weight of this framework, just take a look at the ISSB integration here. The SASB standards are now officially under the stewardship of the ISSB. That's the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is part of the whole IFRS Foundation. Honestly, this isn't just some niche set of guidelines. This is the globally recognized authoritative standard for sustainability-related financial disclosures. When companies report using these exact metrics, they are speaking a language that investors and regulators all over the world understand, and most importantly, trust. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is just the sheer volume and granularity of the ESG metrics tracked here. I mean, it kind of looks daunting, right? You've got everything from Scope 1 emissions to hazardous waste recycled, and it's all paired with highly specific quantitative units like metric tons or exact percentages. But don't worry, we are absolutely not going to get lost in the weeds of every single technical code today. I promise to keep this simple for you. To prevent total cognitive overload, let's organize all these dozens of metrics into the universally understood ESG buckets. So E for environmental. That covers things like greenhouse gas emissions, air quality, water management, and biodiversity. Then S for social metrics, which zeroes in on labor practices, community relations, and human rights. And finally, G for governance. This handles the really strict oversight needed for business ethics, workforce safety, and the frankly critical management of tailing storage facilities. Grouping the standard this way just makes it incredibly logical. Section 2, tracking environmental impacts. Let's look closely at that E in ESG. The standard strictly tracks things like Scope 1 emissions, as well as the exact percentage of water consumed in regions with high or extremely high baseline water stress. And then we have very specific environmental hazards like acid rock drainage, or ARD. Let's break down that industry jargon for a second. Acid rock drainage is basically this acid-generating seepage. It forms when surface water comes into contact with mining overburden. It essentially turns the water highly acidic and severely contaminates it with heavy metals. As you can imagine, the harmful effects of that on humans, local wildlife, and vegetation can be absolutely devastating and really long-lasting if it isn't properly managed. Because ARD is so serious, the SASB standard holds companies strictly accountable. It tracks the exact percentage of mine sites where this acid drainage is predicted to occur, where it's actively being mitigated, and where it is currently under treatment or already remediated. So it isn't just about spotting a problem, it's about forcing total transparency on exactly what the company is doing to fix it. Moving on to Section 3, managing waste and tailings. Look, mining involves moving a monumental amount of earth, and that sheer volume of waste presents massive, long-term threats to ecosystems if it's not handled perfectly. The standard effortlessly contrasts the dichotomy between two main types of waste here. First, you have mineral waste. This is the material generated directly during the extraction and beneficiation of ores. Think waste rock. And then you have non-mineral waste. That's your everyday industrial refuse, things like scrap metal, used oil, old tires, and other discarded materials. Both of these streams have to be meticulously tracked and reported by weight in metric tons. But without a doubt, the most critical waste stream here is tailings. Let's define this super clearly to make sure we're on the same page. Tailings are the waste materials left over after the commercially valuable minerals have been completely separated from the extracted ore. They're usually stored in these massive liquid or semi-liquid impoundments that, no joke, can actually be seen from space. Because of what's in them and how they're stored, tailings facilities present uniquely critical and hazardous risks. A catastrophic failure here, it can be absolutely devastating to the surrounding area. And this brilliantly illustrates how SASB addresses that exact risk. They require a rigorous tailings governance framework. It's a strict step-by-step approach, requiring continuous performance monitoring, frequent risk assessments, independent technical reviews, specifically by outside experts not directly involved with the site, and incredibly comprehensive emergency response plans. This level of standardized disclosure is literally designed to prevent those catastrophic dam failures we just talked about and ensure companies are prioritizing safety above all else. Section 4. People, Rights, and Communities. Pivoting to the social pillar here, it's really crucial to remember that global resource extraction doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It happens right in the backyards of real communities. So, how do you actually measure a mine's relationship with its neighbors? It's a fascinating question, right? Well, SAS bridges the gap between dry data and real human impact by having companies track what they call non-technical delays. This means measuring the number and the duration of site shutdowns that are caused by protests, community resistance, or pending regulatory permits related to community concerns. It essentially puts a tangible financial metric right on community relations. To avoid those expensive delays, companies really need to respect community rights and interests. The standard details exactly what this entails across 4 key areas. You have economic rights, like fair wages and land respect, environmental rights, meaning clean air and safe water discharge, social rights, like adequate healthcare and education, and cultural rights, which means protecting sacred or burial sites. Honestly, exploiting a community's resources without providing these socioeconomic benefits almost inevitably leads to huge, costly disruptions. Now, when we talk about where this mining actually happens, we have to look at reserves. The standard clarifies the technical difference between proved reserves and probable reserves. Proved reserves have dimensions and grades that are very well established from detailed sampling, meaning we know exactly what is down there. Probable reserves are computed similarly, but the observation points are farther apart, so naturally there's a bit less certainty. SASB asks companies to track exactly where both types of these planned mining activities are located. And specifically, they are tracking reserves located in or near highly sensitive areas. This includes areas of active conflict, which is strictly defined as zones having 25 or more battle-related deaths per year. It includes indigenous land, tracking how well companies uphold international agreements like ILO Convention 169. And it includes endangered species habitats. Exploring or extracting in these specific zones carries extreme operational risks, significant human rights implications, and massive reputational hazards. So transparency here is absolutely vital. Let's move to our final pillar, Section 5, Ethics, Safety, and Transparency. Because a mine might be totally environmentally sound, but if it's unsafe for the workers or secured through backroom bribery, it is definitely not sustainable. First up, workforce health and safety metrics. Look, mining is a naturally hazardous industry, and without strict oversight, people get hurt. So the standard tracks the all-incidence rate, the fatality rate, the near-miss frequency rate, which is absolutely crucial for catching problems before they cause real harm, and the average hours of health and emergency response training. And, crucially, it requires these rates for both direct employees and contract employees, so there is no hiding contractor injuries off the official books. So the crucial point here is how we standardize all these safety rates so we can fairly compare companies of vastly different sizes. SASB uses a 200,000 hours baseline. To put that into perspective, that represents exactly 100 full-time workers working 40 hours a week for 50 weeks out of the year. By calculating safety incidents against this specific baseline, it takes these abstract safety rates and grounds them in a tangible reality. This lets investors clearly see which companies are truly prioritizing worker safety. Finally, the standard tackles global business ethics completely head-on. It does this by forcing companies to transparently disclose their production volumes that are located in the 20 lowest rankings of Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index. By bringing this specific data out into the light, SASB heavily targets the risk of bribery and corruption. It ensures investors know exactly how much of a company's revenue is generated in the 20 most corruption-prone countries on Earth. Bringing this whole narrative together, the framework highlights a really modern shift toward what we call a shared value approach. The goal isn't just extraction at all costs anymore. It's really about providing significant socioeconomic benefits to local communities while still allowing entities to operate profitably. Standardized transparency, accurate measurement, and a deep respect for both the environment and people. That's what drives this mutual benefit.
Which leads us to a final, pretty provocative thought. If what gets measured gets managed, is standardized transparency the ultimate tool for safely transforming global resource extraction? By laying out every single environmental, social, and governance metric clearly on the table, the SASB framework doesn't just record data, it demands real accountability. It leaves us to wonder just how much cleaner and safer this massive industry can become when absolutely everything is brought out into the light. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring the fascinating world of corporate accountability.